George Harrison and his childhood home. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. Today we're going to see the childhood home of George Harrison. George was born and spent his early childhood at 12 Arnold Grove. George's mom and dad, Harold and Louise, moved into the house in 1941 following their marriage. The rent there was 10 shillings a week. There were 4 kids in the family home, and George lived there for 6 years, but his family had been living there for 20 years. So George's oldest brother, Harry, recalled, "Our little house was just 2 rooms up and 2 rooms down, but except for a short period when our father was away at sea, we always knew the comfort and security of a very close-knit home life." So what was it like there? Well, George remembered there was a single coal fire, and the house was so cold in the morning that he and his brothers didn't want to get up. Another bad thing was that they had to use an outdoor bathroom, so I bet that was rough. The house was small, with rooms being 10 feet by 10, and there was a small iron cooking stove in the back room, which was used as a kitchen. Describing the back garden, Harrison wrote it had 1-foot wide flower bed, a toilet, a dustbin fitted to the back wall, and a little hen house where we kept chickens. According to Beatles Liverpool Locations blog spot, Albert Grove was named after Queen Victoria's husband, Albert Grove, whereas Arnold was named after the Queen's dresser, Frida Arnold. Both streets were unadopted, meaning that the residents had to make their own arrangements for waste disposal and maintenance rather than have the service provided by the local authority. The house was small, but it managed to have items that George's father had collected on his overseas voyages when he was a steward in the Merchant Navy. The pride of the place was the front room. The Harrisons had a leather 3-piece sofa set. Harry had it shipped from America. A leather sofa was unheard of in those days in that area, but the Harrisons never used it. The family lived in the back room, the kitchen with the red and blue floor tiles, and the fire in the grate. So Harry left his high seas life and decided to get a job as a bus driver. So George was born at the house on Thursday, February 25th, 1943, in the front upstairs bedroom at 10 minutes past midnight. He was overdue and he weighed 10.5 pounds. He had long hair, full fingernails, and brown hair. George remembered my grandmother, my mother's mother, used to live in Albert Grove, next to Arnold Grove, so when I was small, I could go out our back door and around the back entries to her house. I would be there when my mother and father were at work. And then some more early memories he had was he remembered sitting on a pot at the top of the stairs having a poop, sorry, and then shouting, "Finished." Another very early memory is as a baby, a party in the street. There were air raid shelters and people sitting around tables and benches, and I must have been no more than 2. And we used to have a photograph of me there, so it's probably only because I could relive the scene when I was younger through the photograph that I remember it. And George also remembered the front room never being used because it was freezing cold in there. We'd all be huddled together in the kitchen where the fire was, where the kettle was on, and a little iron cooking stove. Another memory by George about the freezing cold is that he remembered in the winter there used to be ice on the windows, and in fact you would have to put a hot water bottle in the bed and then whip your clothes off and leap in, and then, and lie still, and then by the next morning you'd get warm, and then you'd have to wake up. "Come on, time for school." Put your hand out of the bed, freezing. Oh dear. So the 4 children shared the back bedroom. In his infancy, George had slept in his parents' room, but he later moved in with his siblings, Louise in one bed, Harry and Peter in another, and George in a cot. So a previous owner of the house described the layout. So the owner said the front door went straight into the living room, which would have been about 12 foot square, and at the back was a small kitchen. The stairs were at the back of the house, and they went up from the kitchen toward the front door. Upstairs was a tiny landing 2 foot by 2 foot, and the front bedroom was the largest and ran the length of the house across, and the back bedroom ran towards the back of the house and was smaller, and there wasn't much room in there, so with all those kids it made it even smaller. So George reminisces more about his childhood there. George said, "There was a zinc bathtub hanging on the backyard wall, which we bring in and fill with hot water from pans and boiling kettles. That would be how we had a bath. We didn't have a bathroom, no jacuzzis. Good place to wash your hair, Liverpool, nice soft water." He said, I had a happy childhood with lots of relatives around, relatives and absolutes, and I was always waking up in the night, coming out of the bedroom, looking down the stairs, and seeing lots of people having a party. It was probably only my parents and an uncle or two. I had quite a few uncles with bald heads. They say they got them by using them to knock pub doors open, but it always seemed that they were partying without telling me. And I don't remember too much about the music. I don't know whether they had anyone performing there, but there was probably a radio on. And George's mom enjoyed listening to Indian classical music for the Indian Forces every Sunday morning on BBC Radio. So that's probably where George got his love of Indian music. And I think our parents do have an influence on us, because I remember when my mom had a Beatles album with the Beatles, and I became a fan ever since. So George's brother also inspired his love of music. So George said my eldest brother, Harry, had a little portable record player that played 45s and 33s. I could play a stack of 10 records, though he only owned 3. He kept them neatly in their sleeves, and one of them was by Glenn Miller. When he was out, everything was always left tidy. The wires, the lead, and the plugs were all wrapped around, and nobody was supposed to use it. But as soon as he'd go out, my brother Pete and I would put them on. We'd play anything. My dad had bought a wind-up gramophone in New York when he was a seaman and had brought it back on the ship. It was a wooden one where you opened up the doors, and the top doors had a speaker behind, and the records were stored in the bottom. And then there were needles in little tin boxes. He also brought some records from America, including one by Jimmie Rodgers, the singing brakeman. He was Hank Williams' favorite singer and the first country singer I ever heard. He had a lot of tunes such as Waiting for a Train and Blue for a Train, and that led me to the guitar. So George had loving memories of Arnold Grove. He stated, it was okay, that house, very pleasant being little, and it was always sunny in the summer. But then we moved, and after about 25 years on the housing list, we moved. So George was born during the war, and it was a time when the Germans were bombing England. George lived in a small home with his family, and it was there that he was surrounded by his loving family, and it was his family that influenced his life. His love of music began with his mother and brother, and it was his dad who bought the stereos and some of the albums. And buying his home in Friar Park makes sense. He and his family lived in such a small place, and when he saw Friar Park, it must have been the stuff of dreams, with all the space he could ever need. So George sometimes had trouble remembering his Beatle days. He was a little shell-shocked by all that happened at times, but his young childhood days he could remember with ease. He was in a loving home with his parents and siblings, and they had a close bond, and that's the most important thing of all to remember. So I hope everybody enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. Also, click on the notification bell, and you'll be notified whenever a new video is available. I hope everybody's been having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.